There are journeys not just to reach a destination, but to touch a boundary. And sometimes that boundary isn't marked on any itinerary. It lives in someone's gaze, silent assumptions, or the seat they believe you shouldn't sit in. Gate 23, 11:02 a.m. Atlantic Airways Flight 447 is preparing to depart for Chicago. The electronic screen flashes a soft warning boarding will be completed within half an hour. Only a few first-class passengers trickle in. Cream leather seats gleam under warm, mellow lights. The whispers of flight attendants blend with the quiet hum of rolling suitcases, forming the calm, measured rhythm of those with first-class tickets. Everything here is designed to make passengers feel important, unless someone silently believes you don't belong here. Terrell Wilson, 48 years old. Dark-skinned, composed in stature, sits still in seat 1A. He doesn't look like a man basking in privilege. He doesn't recline, doesn't order a drink, doesn't flash a polite smile at the attendant. He's reading a long email on his phone, squinting slightly from the window's glare. Outside, snow begins to fall gently. Inside, a quiet storm is gathering. He wears a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. He looks more like an engineer on a work trip than a millionaire executive. At his feet sits a leather briefcase, genuine, leather-worn edges. Classic design, the only object hinting that this man might not be ordinary. A flight attendant approaches. Deshawn Smith, around 30, confident posture. A cold, professional face, the kind trained into the airline's image. She looks at Terrell. No smile. "Sir, I must ask you to move to the back. This area is for first-class passengers only." Her voice isn't loud, but just sharp enough for those in 2A, 3B, and even the man typing in 4C to look up. A few phones are subtly pulled out, disguised behind motions of checking notifications. Terrell looks up. He doesn't react immediately. He blinks slowly, eyes on the attendant, as if silently wondering if she's made a mistake. But he doesn't ask that. Instead, he opens his wallet and takes out his boarding pass. Seat 1A. First-class ticket. 1 second of silence. Long enough for the tension in the air to harden into quiet doubt. The attendant frowns. "Then I'll need to see your ID." No apology, no uncertainty, just a quiet certainty that the man in front of her could not possibly belong in that seat. And at that very moment, the first door in a chain of historic events began to open, with one passenger, one seat, and a system on the brink of being put on trial. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin begins to shift, like someone has turned down the volume of the world. The man in 2A tilts his head to look. The woman in 3B stops flipping through her magazine. Eyes begin to exchange silent whispers. "What's going on over there?" But Terrell Wilson remains calm. He reaches into his wallet again and retrieves another card, his Illinois driver's license. It's a clear photo and the name matches. He doesn't say another word. He hands both the boarding pass and ID to the attendant. Deshawn Smith takes them, studies them carefully as if she's inspecting a counterfeit bill. She tilts her head and taps her tablet several times. Her face stays tight as a wire. Another attendant approaches. Andre Moore, tall, slim, speaks softly. "What's going on?" Deshawn lowers her voice, but not enough to escape the unintended eavesdropping of curious ears. "This man claims he has a first-class ticket." Andre raises his eyebrows. Deshawn adds tone edged with irritation. "Doesn't look like it." Terrell hears it. Of course he does. But still he doesn't react. "I'm sorry," he says, voice even. "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago. If there's been a mistake, I'd appreciate it if you could recheck the system." Deshawn tightens her grip on the tablet. She swipes, scrolls, looks. Her face shifts from suspicion to uncertainty, then quickly returns to icy composure. Sir, the system shows you purchased an economy ticket. Maybe it's a glitch in the mobile app. Please return to your seat in the rear. No, Terrell says, eyes still locked on her. I did not purchase economy. Atlantic Airways' system issued this boarding pass. I still have the confirmation email. He lifts his phone. The screen shows an electronic ticket number, date of purchase, and seat 1A marked with the airline's logo. All are valid. A long silence stretches out. Deshawn doesn't take the phone. She steps back, doesn't look at Terrell anymore. She looks at Andre. He's probably mistaken, or trying something. The word trying lands like a quiet blade, an unofficial accusation but as heavy as stone. Behind them, the man in seat 2A, white gray-haired, wearing a gray blazer, leans forward. Buddy, he says, voice low but commanding like someone used to giving orders. I think you should head back to your actual seat. Not worth making a scene. Deshawn nods almost instinctively. No one asks. What if he's not mistaken? Terrell breathes deeply. His hand grips the leather strap of his briefcase. His eyes stay on Deshawn. I'm not making a scene. I'm sitting in the seat I purchased, paid for, and have proof of. If you have access to the system, I respectfully ask that you check again objectively. Something shifts in Deshawn's expression. Not humility, but caution. It is as if she suddenly feels pushed into unfamiliar territory, defensive and unprepared. She swipes again, checks once more. No change. Her brow tightens. I don't know what trick you're using, she says, but I'm going to need you to move before we involve airport security. You think I hacked the airline's system? I'm not saying that, she replies. I'm just saying, people buy cheap tickets and sneak into first class all the time. It's not unheard of. Terrell stays quiet for a beat. Then he opens his briefcase and takes out a hard plastic card. He places it gently on the folding tray. Atlantic Platinum member card, 340,000 miles accumulated, 6 consecutive years at the airline's highest tier. She doesn't take it, doesn't examine it, just offers a single line. Cards like that can be made online too. Terrell's lips tighten slightly, but his eyes do not move from hers. Just a few seats away, Skywatcher types quickly on her phone, black passenger with full valid documents being publicly humiliated on Atlantic Airways Flight 447. Discrimination. What year is this? From the moment Deshawn walked over, only 6 minutes have passed. 6 minutes. Enough to strip away the illusion. Some people still do not believe they belong even when they purchase the correct ticket. At that moment, first-class seats were no longer just luxurious seats. It has become a stage for an unspoken truth. The right to be believed is a privilege, and not everyone is handed one. The plane hadn't left the gate yet, but the crisis had already taken flight. In seat 4C, Skywatcher, real name, Lena Rios. A 19-year-old sophomore majoring in communications was no longer just scrolling social media. She was commanding it. Left hand steadying her phone, right hand tapping furiously across the touchscreen like a Storm Flight 447. A black passenger sitting in the correct seat with a boarding pass and ID is still being forced out of first class. Atlantic Airways. Discrimination in real time. The tweet had been shared over 70 times in less than 2 minutes. A short video clip she recorded of Terrell presenting his boarding pass and elite membership was already live. The live stream interface lit up. Viewers started pouring in seat 3B. Dr. Terrell Jones, a surgeon known for operating in situations where no one was expected to survive, quietly pulled out his phone and started recording. He wasn't used to live streaming, but the expression on the man before him, calm, steady, almost serene in the face of humiliation, made him feel something profound in his gut. This time, silence isn't an option. In 2A, the older man with gray hair began to grow impatient. He muttered, "We're going to be late for everything." Deshawn Smith seemed to sense it too. She raised her hand to the walkie-talkie and spoke, "Ground control. We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. Security assistance may be required at gate 23. Each word landed with weight echoing in the ears of every listener. No one spoke. But one by one, phone cameras tilted toward Terrell. He unlocked his phone, and for the first time in his life he pressed record himself, not out of fear, but because he had lived too long watching others tell his story incorrectly. It is 2:47 p.m. I'm being asked to vacate a first-class seat that I legally purchased. I've shown my boarding pass ID and membership card. I'm recording this for my protection." He spoke in a low, even voice. There was not a single note of anger. Deshawn turned back toward him. "Sir, please put your phone away. This behavior is disrupting the cabin." "No," he replied, his eyes locked on the lens. "I am documenting a systemic act of discrimination." Behind him, Lena Rios whispered to her live stream, "They're forcing him to leave his seat just because he doesn't look like a first-class passenger." The viewer count exploded 270, then 400, then 580. The hashtag #Atlantic Airways. Discrimination was rising toward trending. Then 2 airport security officers appeared at the cabin entrance. Mike Santos, 20 years of experience etched into his quiet gait, and Lisa Chen. All eyes turned to them like spectators watching law enforcement enter a theater mid-performance. Mike scanned the cabin. He saw a middle-aged black man dressed modestly, seated calmly. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a group of flight attendants and dozens of phones were raised. "What's going on here?" he asked. Deshawn stepped forward and pointed. "This passenger refuses to leave a seat that doesn't belong to him." "May I see your boarding pass?" Mike asked, voice steady. Terrell handed it over immediately, saying nothing. Mike reviewed the boarding pass, then the ID. Everything matched seat 1A. First class, name perfectly aligned. Deshawn leaned in quickly. "That pass could be fake. I've seen ones like that before." Mike looked up at her, his seasoned eyes narrowing as though he'd heard this line too many times to count. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "the airline's system issues all boarding passes. If there's a problem, it's internal, not the passenger's fault." A soft wave of murmurs spread across the cabin. Someone even clapped lightly but clearly. Deshawn's expression tightened, but she didn't back down. "These people. They know how to work the system," she blurted out. "These people." The phrase sliced through the air like a razor. Mike Santos turned and looked directly at Terrell. He said nothing, but in that gaze was something unmistakable recognition. He had heard those words before, many times, from many mouths. Sir Mike spoke in a different tone, calm, respectful, lower in register. "Would you be willing to step off the plane for just a moment so that we can verify everything properly? You're not being forced. I want to handle this the right way." Terrell studied his face, considered it, and then nodded. As he stood, his phone buzzed. A new message, "Boardroom A. Meeting has started. Everyone's waiting for you." Dr. Jones glanced at the notification just a row behind in 3B. He frowned. A board meeting? Who receives that kind of message while being escorted out of first class? He didn't know the answer, but the entire world was about to find out. And every camera was already rolling. The airplane door opened like a second takeoff, but it was for the truth this time. Terrell Wilson stepped off the plane with composed poise, his familiar leather briefcase in his right hand and phone recording in his left. He didn't scowl, didn't lift his chin defiantly, or glance around like someone who had just been humiliated. He walked as someone who knew he would return under entirely different terms. At Gate 23, the waiting area was already packed. Some economy-class passengers had stepped out to see what was going on. Many didn't recognize Terrell's face, but most had seen his image circulating on Twitter or TikTok under a now viral hashtag. Passenger 3B Dr. Terrell Jones also stepped out as if intuition told him this was no longer a minor incident, but a defining moment. A security officer, Mike Santos, escorted Terrell to the ID check counter. Standing there was Malik Miller, Atlantic Airways airport supervisor, who had been called in to handle the situation. Malik had handled many messes before: lost baggage, drunk passengers, even full-blown crew disputes. But never once had he felt so many lenses aimed at him like now. He took Terrell's boarding pass ID and membership card and checked each carefully, almost performatively, to show transparency. "Valid ticket," he announced. "Name matches, correct seat. Platinum membership is verified in the system." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "So, he was telling the truth." Malik didn't lift his eyes from the documents, but he said slowly, like grasping for something to lean on, "The flight crew reported that the passenger was uncooperative. In that situation, I had to make a judgment call to ensure flight safety." Terrell gave a quiet nod, then unlocked his phone. He scrolled, opened an email, and held the screen to Malik. "You might want to read this," he said calmly. Malik glanced at the screen. It was an internal memo from Atlantic Airways, sent to its largest investor, an emergency board meeting notification. The recipient, Terrell. Wilson at wilsonindustries.com. Malik's eyes flickered. "Wilson Industries." "Yes," Terrell replied, still without emphasis. "I'm the CEO." No sound came, but the sudden hush across the terminal was louder than any shout. A woman in the livestream group gasped, "What CEO of a corporation?" Lena at Skywatcher was already searching a few taps. A website was loaded. It was in bold, Terrell Wilson, founder and CEO of Wilson Industries. Not just a CEO, but the second largest investor in Atlantic Airways, holding 23% equity, announced just 6 months ago. "Oh, dear God," Dr. Jones whispered. "They just kicked a major shareholder out of his first-class seat." Malik looked up. His mouth opened slightly, but no words followed. Terrell placed his briefcase on a chair, opened it, and pulled out a black leather folder. Inside were printed documents stamped and signed. He took out one sheet and handed it to Malik. "Investment confirmation from Wilson Industries into Atlantic Airways. Total value $1.9 billion. Malik held the paper like it might explode. His hand trembled slightly. A faint, "Oh my God," came from the hallway. Terrell continued, this time speaking louder, as if addressing everyone in earshot. "Wilson Industries books 847 flights annually with Atlantic. Our annual travel spend $1.2 million. I have been a platinum member for 6 consecutive years, 340,000 air miles, and 63 private trips just last year." Malik struggled to keep his composure. I didn't know this. No one told me." "That's the problem." Terrell interjected, his tone firm for the first time. "I don't need to be recognized. But when the system treats someone like me as a fraud while I own a part that's not just wrong, it's a symptom of something deeply broken." Dr. Jones stepped up beside Terrell. "I was in the cabin when it happened." He never raised his voice. He presented his documents and asked to be verified. That line echoed around. He never raised his voice. Lena at Skywatcher whispered to her viewers. He didn't get angry, didn't shout. He just presented the truth. And that truth is now a ticking time bomb under Atlantic Airways. Malik slumped into a chair, sweating. And Terrell. He finally lifted his chin, smiling, not because he had won, but because the truth had finally stood up and spoken for itself. The moment Terrell Wilson confirmed he was the CEO of Wilson Industries, it struck the terminal like lightning on a clear day. But what happened next was the storm. Atlantic Airways senior supervisor Janet Miller had just exited the elevator. Company blazer draped over her shoulders, silver name badge gleaming. She had been summoned to handle an unruly passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. But Janet didn't find a belligerent passenger. She saw a man calmly live streaming, holding a file, standing beside security, and completely commanding the situation. "What's going on here?" she asked. Malik stood like someone waking from a daze. "Janet, perhaps we should talk privately." Terrell turned to her without further introduction. "Good afternoon, Ms. Miller. We've met before, though you may not recall. I'm one of Atlantic Airways' primary shareholders." Janet paused. Her polite smile masked visible confusion. "Oh, yes. Nice to see you again, Mr. Wilson. Apologies for the inconvenience. I understand there was a seating misunderstanding." "No," Terrell interrupted, calm but firm. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination. Deliberate. Systemic. And now it's being broadcast to thousands." Skywatcher whispered to her phone. "This is the most cinematic exchange I've ever witnessed in real life." Janet scanned the area. At least 20 people were recording. Among them, a young woman with a Bluetooth headset was narrating live to an audience. "Mr. Wilson." Janet tried to manage the mood. "I deeply regret what happened, but perhaps we can resolve this internally. We can upgrade your seat offer premium service. There's no need to go public." "Going public is necessary," Terrell said, locking eyes with her. "Because this didn't just happen to me. It happens to thousands of passengers without equity live streams or anyone to speak for them." At that moment, Janet realized this was no longer within her control. Terrell opened his leather folder and handed her a document with a raised seal. "You should read this," he said. Janet glanced down at a formal statement signed by the current CEO, Quincy Miller, confirming that Wilson Industries owned 23% of Atlantic Airways, the second largest shareholder. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. "Internal call. CEO Quincy Miller." She swallowed. Terrell remained composed. "I believe that's the call I predicted you'd receive." Janet stepped aside and answered. "Yes, Ms. Miller. He's here?" "Yes. It's all being live streamed. No, I haven't made a move yet." "Yes, I understand." Everyone stared at her as if she were the only one who hadn't seen the movie they were all quoting. When she returned, her face had gone pale. "Mr. Wilson, our CEO would like to speak with you. Right now. On speaker." Terrell nodded. "Go ahead." Janet turned on speaker mode. A cold, sharp voice echoed through the quiet air. "Terrell. It's me, Quincy. I just stepped out of an emergency board meeting. What's happening at Gate 23? What's happening is I was treated like a fraud because of my skin and my clothes despite my documentation membership and first-class ticket." "Oh my God. Is there a video?" "Yes. And it's being live-streamed to over 2,000 viewers. The hashtag is trending nationally." Silence. "Then, what do you need me to do?" Terrell glanced around. Over 30 people were holding their breath. Every word now was more than speech executive direction, a real-time crisis management model playing out live. "I need you to authorize me full control to handle this situation, including operational, media, and personnel decisions. And I need you to confirm that, here and now." Janet looked at the phone. Quincy answered without hesitation. "Full control. Do whatever you think is right. I'll back you from the top." Terrell nodded for the first time, tilting his head like a general accepting command. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show rage, but everyone could feel it. The game had just flipped. No one in the Gate 23 waiting area spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that settles in when you realize you're witnessing history that initially seemed like another unfortunate incident. Terrell Wilson ended the speaker call. He turned to Janet Miller, the airport supervisor, and spoke in a low but steady tone. "Now we need to handle this the proper way." Janet swallowed. "What do you mean?" Terrell pulled a thick set of color-printed documents from his briefcase bound in a clear plastic folder. The cover page read, "Shareholder Agreement, Atlantic Airways, Section 12.3 highlighted, according to Clause 12.3 of the Shareholder Agreement. He began any systemic discriminatory action against passengers or business partners qualifies as a material incident, a severe breach subject to governance review and shareholder rights intervention." Janet's eyes widened. And under Clause 12.3.4, Terrell continued, "A major shareholder is entitled to demand an emergency board meeting and initiate temporary governance override if such an incident threatens the company's brand value or public image." Janet stammered, "Are you threatening to sue us?" Terrell shook his head. "No. I'm exercising a legal right this airline granted me when they signed this contract. That's the difference." Social media was still erupting. At Skywatcher whispered to her, now 4,000 plus viewers. "This just escalated from racial profiling to high-level corporate strategy, and I'm recording every minute." At the boarding gate, passengers had begun to sit down as if watching a live congressional hearing. In that atmosphere, Terrell made another call. This time, no speaker was needed, but everyone saw him scroll through his contacts and tap Vance, legal board lead. The call lasted less than a minute. He spoke little, listened more. When it ended, he nodded once. In under an hour, he announced Atlantic Airways will have an emergency board meeting to review the protocols and response involved. They've asked me to present an initial live report from here. Janet blinked. "From here? From the gate?" "Yes." Terrell smiled. "Because the incident happened here. This system is accepted as routine, not in a spreadsheet but in glances, tones, and assumptions." A few heads nodded. Still watching from 3B, Dr. Terrell Jones whispered, "He's not trying to win. He's trying to fix it." From the gate's edge, Captain Elijah Jones, who had ordered Terrell to vacate his seat, walked forward. Someone had summoned him to restore order. He still carried that air of military command, but his eyes revealed unease. When Terrell looked at him, there was no rage, only a silent expectation that truth would now be acknowledged. Elijah Terrell addressed him by name. "I've read your safety reports. Strong record. 15 years without a single major incident." The captain looked surprised. "You read my file? Chen Industries now?" "Wilson Group always vets leadership records of companies we invest in. I've read all of it." "Then why didn't you say something earlier?" Elijah asked stiffly. "Because people shouldn't need status to be treated with dignity." That answer left Elijah speechless. He lowered his head, said nothing more. Another phone rang. Janet answered that it was CEO Quincy Miller again, but this time he was calling to initiate the emergency shareholder meeting. It would happen immediately, with Terrell presenting live from Gate 23 via video link. Janet turned to Terrell. "They want you to give the opening remarks." He nodded. Pulling out his Bluetooth headset, he connected it to his laptop. As passengers held their breath, his image appeared on a 75-inch screen inside Atlantic Airways' executive boardroom, where the CEO, legal counsel, and 8 board members sat waiting. One of them spoke casually. "Mr. Wilson, Can you briefly explain why this incident qualifies as a material breach? Terrell took no more than 15 seconds, because your system didn't need proof to doubt me, but required double the proof to trust me. And in an industry where 70% of your passengers are people of color or immigrants, that's not just unjust, it's a financial liability. The silence on the other end said it all. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about governance. Terrell Wilson, the man removed from a seat he had legally purchased, was now reshaping the corporate structure of a national airline. The live-streamed board meeting was also being broadcast onto the main screen at Atlantic Airways headquarters. On it, Terrell's face appeared serious, lit from behind by the glass panels of the terminal window, as if a spotlight had found him by accident. Esteemed board, Terrell began. I won't rehash the incident. The video has done that. The data will fill in the rest. I didn't come here to reclaim seat 1A. I came to reclaim dignity not just for myself, but for the thousands without a microphone equity or live stream. The screen changed to the first slide. 63 flights in the last 12 months. 340,000 miles flown. 23% equity. Wilson Industries. Then a bold red line. 0 times verified before being assumed fraudulent. Across the boardroom, eyes met in silence. Quincy Miller exhaled. Terrell, we sincerely apologize. I didn't come for an apology, Terrell replied. I came to make demands. His voice wasn't cold, but it was so clear no one missed a word. First demand. Immediate termination of flight attendant Deshaun Smith and Captain Elijah Jones for breach of conduct and blatant discriminatory behavior. Quincy hesitated. Deshaun is young. We could put her through retraining. No. Terrell cut in. This is no longer about individuals. It's about precedent. Without decisive action, every training module from here on out is meaningless. A pause. Then one board member raised a hand I support. Seconded. Approved. Second demand. Terrell continued. Mandatory bias and systemic discrimination awareness training within 30 days for all customer-facing staff, regardless of rank. One member protested. That'll be costly. We'd have to redo materials and hire consultants. Terrell clicked to the next slide. Atlantic Airways 2024 revenue $8.2 billion. Projected cost for company-wide training $2.4 million, or 0.029% of revenue. The issue, he said, isn't money. It's will. Inside. Gate 23. Small applause broke out. On several live streams, emojis began to float. At Skywatcher whispered, I've never seen a revolution presented this gracefully. Third demand, Terrell continued. Establish an anonymous third-party reporting system for employees and passengers to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Quincy sat up straighter. We already have an internal hotline. That hotline, Terrell said, didn't prevent what happened to me or the hundreds of others who didn't have live streams. If you don't trust the whistleblowers, the public won't trust the system. One board member asked. Do you want to manage this system? No, Terrell said. I want the system to be beyond the reach of those it might expose. I want absolute transparency, not performative transparency. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang like a gavel strike. Fourth demand. Create a Dignity in Flight fund of $500,000 to support internal and community-based diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives. The board murmured. One person spoke up. We can't let a single incident lead to broad financial commitments. Terrell looked straight into the camera. This isn't a single incident. It's the result of a system designed not to question itself. And if I weren't a shareholder today, this meeting wouldn't even exist. That truth pierced the room. And the final demand, Terrell said, looking around Gate 23, now quiet, as if hosting a national press conference. A public apology from Atlantic Airways is committed to reform, accountability, and action. Quincy nodded, his eyes slightly red. We'll issue an apology, but we'll need time to format the message. You have 72 hours, Terrell said. Or Wilson Industries will divest entirely and recommend the same to our 53 supply chain partners. This silence wasn't tense. It was reverent. Everyone now understood this wasn't just a passenger's story. Terrell looked into the camera. No one should need power to be respected. But if I have power, I will use it so that those without it are still treated as human beings. And that was the moment Atlantic Airways began to change. After the historic board meeting ended, Gate 23 became a living symbol of where discrimination occurred and where change was initiated. Within 72 hours, everything Terrell Wilson demanded was no longer just on paper. Day 1. The financial quake. That evening, Deshaun Smith and Captain Elijah Jones received termination notices for severe breaches of professional ethics and company policy. The board voted unanimously. No one dared object. Janet Miller, the airport supervisor, was not fired but reassigned as a standards and organizational culture trainer with a mandatory requirement to attend a personal bias awareness counseling program. The media jumped in. The first headlines read, Atlantic Airways shaken shareholder CEO kicked out of first class for not looking rich enough. Black passenger, Fortune 500 CEO, asked to leave paid seat. A confrontation redefines customer service culture. #dignity. In-flight hits 1.2 million impressions in under 18 hours. Atlantic Airways stock initially dropped 1.4%. But by the next day's close, it bounced back 3.2%. After the company announced a sweeping reform plan and publicly accepted all of the lead shareholders' demands. Day 2. The domino effect. The incident quickly escalated beyond one airline. The nonprofit Transportation Equality Foundation recorded a 600% spike in discrimination complaints submitted not because new abuses had occurred, but because people finally believed someone might listen. 6 other airlines immediately convened internal meetings. Delta Airlines announced it would launch a similar anonymous reporting system before we have to learn the same lesson Atlantic just did. Amtrak, the largest rail company in the U.S., appointed its first ever chief diversity officer. Greyhound, the intercity bus line known for serving low-income passengers, issued a statement. We're learning from others' mistakes, so we don't make them ourselves. Day 3. Real change, not slogans. At the Atlantic Airways headquarters in Chicago, an internal message was sent to all employees. We've seen what happens when judgment replaces verification. Now it's time to learn how to listen instead of assume. A new training manual was developed not by PR consultants, but by a coalition of sociologists, behavioral psychologists, and social justice advocates. Gone were the videos about how to smile correctly or how to apologize politely. Instead, the modules featured real-world scenarios involving marginalized passengers, analyses of implicit bias and perceptual distortion, intervention protocols when staff witnessed discriminatory conduct. Terrell Wilson didn't just demand these changes. He oversaw content development. Every page of the material bore the line, developed under the guidance and sponsorship of Wilson Group. Day 5. Action from the ground up. Over 800 emails flooded Wilson Group's public inbox within the first 5 days. Among them was a handwritten letter with clear, unembellished script. I am Angela Thompson, 29 years old, Black Masters in Economics. I was treated like you, but I didn't live stream it. I had no supporters, no investments. I just stayed silent and endured. Thanks to you, I won't be silent next time. I'm now working with the ACLU to turn my experience into evidence for industry reform. Thank you for doing the right thing at the right time. Terrell kept the letter. He had it framed and placed directly above his desk. Day 7. The ripple reaches government. The U.S. Department of Transportation (DOT) called an emergency meeting with representatives from the 6 largest airlines. Transportation Secretary Quincy Taylor stated, "Atlantic has set a precedent, and we will not let it drown in a hashtag." 3 days later, the DOT issued a formal announcement. All airlines must publicly release quarterly reports on discrimination complaints starting next fiscal year. They named the new regulatory code the Atlantic Protocol, from misstep to mandate. Terrell's story was no longer just about a black man in the wrong seat. It had become a question for the entire industry. Will you wait for someone to live stream it, or will you fix the system while it's still in your hands? 3 weeks after the crisis, at the same Gate 23 where it all began, Terrell Wilson's name appeared again on the passenger list. Flight 447, a familiar route New York to Chicago. Same seat, 1A. First class. But this time, no suspicion. No one asked, "Are you sure that's your seat?" He boarded the plane, his old leather briefcase trailing like a loyal companion. But something had changed, not in him, but in how people looked at him. A young, brown-skinned male flight attendant named David offered a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Wilson. It's an honor to serve you today. If you need anything at all, please let me know personally." No forced politeness, no skeptical glances, no stiff voices, just welcome as it should have been from the start. Terrell nodded, smiling faintly. He settled into seat 1A, leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, but for one simple reason. For the first time in years of flying first class, felt like first class. Not long after, Dr. Terrell Jones, who had stood up for him during the fateful flight, boarded and took his seat at 3B. He recognized him immediately. As the plane taxied down the runway, Dr. Jones leaned forward and asked quietly, "Mr. Wilson, I have to ask, how did you stay so calm that day? If I'd gone through even a third of what you did, I'd have lost it." Terrell didn't answer right away. He turned to the window, watching the morning sun shine across the wing. Chicago awaited in the distance, and a new chapter was on the horizon. Then he turned back his gaze, steady yet gentle, because anyone can get angry. But to change a system, you need more than feelings. I didn't need to yell to be heard. I needed a structure that made them accountable. And once you build that, silence carries weight too. Dr. Jones nodded. He said nothing more. Some answers don't need elaboration. They only need to be felt. The plane lifted into the sky. A group of flight attendants worked calmly in the galley. And this time, the first-class cabin was an accurate portrait of diversity. An Indian couple on their honeymoon. A middle-aged Latina woman in a lab coat as a doctor. A white music producer in khaki shorts and a hoodie fresh from the studio. No one looked surprised. No one was questioned. No one had to prove they belonged. Terrell glanced around. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt normal. But for those who were never assumed to be part of that normalcy itself is a quiet victory. No medals, no media frenzy, no standing ovations, just the right to sit and know no one can take it away again. When David returned with a cup of hot tea, he smiled. "Everything all right, Mr. Wilson?" Terrell looked up and nodded. "You're doing great. Sometimes just treating people right changes the whole industry." 2 years after that fateful flight, Terrell Wilson stood at the podium inside the National Civil Rights Museum, addressing the annual Summit on Equity in Transportation. Before him, sat nearly 1,000 people: aviation executives, lawmakers, journalists, students, and passengers who had once been ignored, misseated, or asked to move to the back, simply because they didn't look right. Terrell wasn't reading from a script. He looked straight into the hall. I was once asked to leave a seat I had paid for. But what stayed with me wasn't the humiliation. It was the moment I realized my anger only had value if I turned it into structural change, not just a personal story. The first slide appeared on the screen behind him: discrimination complaints in the airline industry, down 71% since 2025. Then the second slide: 13 airlines' anonymous reporting systems implemented. 6 carriers' bias evaluation added to management KPIs. Then, on the third slide, there is a photograph of Angela Thompson, the young woman who once wrote Terrell a handwritten thank you letter. She was now the lead policy advocate at the ACLU, having spearheaded a successful lawsuit against a major airline that had secretly maintained a system to reject black passengers from premium cabins. Angela didn't need to become a CEO to make change, Terrell said. She needed a voice that was heard. And now, the system has learned to listen because we forced it to. The audience applauded as Angela walked onto the stage holding a copy of the court order mandating mandatory bias training for 47,000 airline employees within 18 months. From the third row, a woman with short hair and a simple gray blazer stood and asked to speak. Her voice trembled slightly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I was the one who asked Mr. Wilson to leave seat 1A 2 years ago." The room fell into stillness. After I was terminated, I spent nearly a year in self-reflection and retraining. Today, I work as a cultural diversity consultant for 3 companies, one of them being an airline. I'm sorry, not because I was caught, but because I lived too long without ever asking what was right. Terrell stepped down from the stage. He said nothing. He walked over and embraced her. It wasn't the embrace of a victor to a vanquished. It was one between someone awakened and someone brave enough to change. The audience rose again, not to celebrate any one person, but because they understood something deeper. A system only truly changes when it can turn those who were once wrong into the very people who help make it right. After the ceremony, Terrell stood alone before a wall engraved with the names of civil rights leaders. On his phone, a new message blinked from the Secretary of Transportation: the Atlantic Protocol will officially become a federal standard starting next month. A light breeze passed through the air. He looked up and smiled. There was no stage, no cameras, no hashtags. Just a man who had once been asked to leave his seat, but chose instead not to leave the fight. We don't need to shout louder to be heard. We need to build a system that can no longer ignore us. Terrell Wilson. Dignity in Transit. Conference 2027.